Hello friends, you're with the Lonesome Gamer, and today I'm gonna play 1889 History of Shikoku Railways by Yasutaka Ikeda. And the game is published by Deep Thought Games, but this is a print and play copy. And when you order a game at Deep Thought Games, it takes a long time until you get it because they specifically build the game for you. So this game wasn't easy to get, but Grand Trunk Games now did a Kickstarter maybe about a year ago, and it should be now re-released in the next month, I assume. So then this game would be widely available, I assume. So usually when I do videos about 18xx games, I just show my playthrough and I don't really explain all the basic rules. I just explain the rules that differentiate the actual game from 1830. 1830 is usually my reference point, and most 18xx gamers know how to play 1830. So therefore, you only explain the differences. Here, in this video series, I want to do it differently. I want to actually try to really teach the rules in the first video, because I think for many players this could be a gateway game. I know many use it as a gateway game, and so I want to try to do a teach here. So first, do a quick component overview. We got the board, the map, which shows the island of Shikoku, and we have this hex grid overimposed here. These are the shares of the 7 public railroad companies. Here we have different trains, 6 different types of them. Over here we have the stock market. This is just kind of a, this just gives you basically setup, instructions, how much money everybody gets and all like that. This is a round tracker. We won't go too much into this here. These are company sheets. That's where the money and the trains of the company is stored. These are private companies. There are 7 private companies, but not all of them are used when you play with 2 or 3 players. A lot of markers for the different companies. Some are used to track the share price over here on the stock market. So something like that. And some are used as stations on the map. We have money. That does not come with the game. These are poker chips. Usually you get paper money. We got different track tiles. Yellow, green, and brown track tiles. And I guess that's pretty much it. The goal of every 18xx game is to get the most wealth. You want to be the richest player at the end of the game. That means your personal cash, and in addition to that, the value of the shares that you own. And the value is tracked here on the stock market, as I already mentioned. You will also control probably these railroad companies, and they have also money. They have a capital in the treasury. It's placed simply really like, just like that. Okay, so this indicates how much money is in a company. And this money does not count at the end toward your score, because it's not your money, it's the company's money. The game ends in two ways. Either one of the players goes bankrupt, that will end the game immediately, or the bank runs out of money. The bank has 7,000 yen, and if the bank runs out of money, then the game end is triggered. The flow of the game is the following. You have stock rounds, and during the stock rounds, players will trade shares. They will always trade with the bank. They will not trade with each other. Between the stock rounds, you have an increasing number of operating rounds. At the start of the game, there will be only one operating round, and then you have the next stock round. A little later, you will have 2 and then even 3 operating rounds between the single stock rounds. And during the operating rounds, the companies will operate here on that map. They will lay track, they will try to connect valuable revenue centers, and they will generate income. They have then the option to either keep the income in their treasury for later investment, or they can pay the income to the shareholders. And that's how the players make money. And then, when the companies have operated, a new stock round starts, and the players can use that money that they earned during the operating round to invest again in shares. And that's pretty much the flow of the game. So, before I go into the stock round, let me quickly talk a little, let's take a closer look at the companies and at the shares, basically. So, every company has 8 shares, 10%, and 1 president's share. And the player who holds the most shares, he is the president of the company. So for example, if I hold 30% of a company and I am the president, and you hold also 30%, and then you buy another 10% share, then I have to give you the president's certificate, and you give me 2 of your 10% shares. So I don't lose any shares, but I lose the presidency. That also works the other way around. So for example, if I have 40% and you have 30%, and I decide to sell my shares, I would give you the presidency, you give me 20%, and then I would sell my 4 shares. And then you're the player who holds the most shares, and you hold the presidency. Now it is important that the presidency is always the first share that has to be bought from a company. That's why it is placed on top. And it is also a share that can never be sold into the bank. So when you are a president and you want to get rid of your last 20%, you have to make sure that there is somebody else who has at least 20% so that you can exchange the presidency with him. Because you're not allowed to sell the presidency back to the bank. That's an important aspect. Now, what's it about the presidency? There are two main things that are interesting. One is good, one is bad. So first, if you're the president of a company, you have absolute control over the operations of that company during the operating rounds. You are the one to decide what the company does, and if there are other shareholders, if there are other players who are invested in your company, doesn't matter. Of course, they can advise you. It might be fun to do that, but you are the only one who makes the decisions. The bad news is, if the company, and that's the only situation when this can happen, if the company has no train and it has also not enough money to buy a train, then you as the president has to pay what it takes to buy that train. So you have to pay the difference between the money that the company has left and the actual price of the train. Usually your money and the company's money is never mixed up. It never happens. If the company cannot pay for anything, they cannot do it. But if the company has no train, then you as the president, you're on the hook. You have to buy a train for these guys. Now, at the beginning, that's not a big deal, right? I mean, the stuff is not so expensive. But if you look here, this last train costs you $1,100. And just to give you an idea, there is only $7,000 overall in the bank. So, you know, 1,100 is a lot of money. And yeah, there is a reason why in some games players go bankrupt, because if this happens, there's a good chance you could go bankrupt. So be careful if you're the president that your companies have trains, or at least one. Let's talk about the stock round now. A stock round, and that's also how the game starts. The stock round also always begins with the player who holds the priority deal. This is the first player to act in a stock round. That's a pretty good position because you can react on the developments during the last operating rounds. You're the first to sell shares of bad companies, for example. So, what you can do is you can sell any number of shares, and these shares are placed here in the open market. And for every share that you sell, the share value will drop down one space of that given company. So if I sell, if I sell, for example, 5 shares, each for $100 of that railroad here, then I get $500, but then the value goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It drops down to 65. Okay. Then it is possible that I buy one single certificate. Now, certificate means basically a piece of paper. So a certificate can be this double share, a presidency, or it's just a standard share. This is called certificate. Now, there are a few restrictions here. First of all, I cannot sell shares of a given company if they're already 50% in the market. Here in this case, it is written here no more than 50%. And I already mentioned that I'm not allowed to sell the presidency. So these are the two restrictions when it comes to selling. When it comes to buying, there are also two restrictions. First of all, I'm not allowed to buy more certificates so that I would get over the certificate limit. And that is indicated here. Here is the certificate limit, and I can check, for example, if we play a 3-player game, I can have up to 19 certificates. The second restriction is if I already have 60% of a given company, so if I already have 6 shares, I'm also not allowed to buy additional shares of that company. You're not allowed to have more than 60% of a company. So these are the 2 restrictions when it comes to buying shares. There is an exception to that. If the share values of a company is in the colored areas down here, then they do not count towards the certificate limit. And if it is in the brown area, in addition to the first one, you can also have more than 60%. So it doesn't count against the certificate limit, and you can have more than 60% of a given company. But that's an exception, and it only applies to these spaces down here. So the general rule is maximum of 60%. And keep in mind, you can only buy a single certificate when it's your turn. You can sell as many as you want, but only one to buy. And then it's the next player. And he can do the same. And this will basically go on, but players can also pass. They're not forced to trade. They can also simply pass. If you pass, and then other players act, and then it's your turn again, you can act again. It's not like passing eliminates you for the rest of the stock round, right? However, if all the players consecutively pass, then the stock round ends. No matter if you want to do something again, there is always a risk. If you pass and then all the others also pass, then the stock round is over. Then we already mentioned the priority deal. This is the token that indicates who is allowed to start the next stock round. The priority deal is then given to the player who is sitting left to the player who did the last action. So basically during this turn, when everybody consecutively passed, the player who passed first, he gets the priority deal. And this is basically how a stock round works. It's not such a big deal, right? Let's talk about how to start a company, because this is a bit different. So what you do is, when you want to start a company, first you have to choose which company you want to take. Now, there's 2 differences, relevant differences for the companies, and that is, first of all, companies have different starting locations. You can see here, these symbols indicate the starting locations of the different companies. And of course it makes sense if you start in a position where you are maybe near a profitable city, or where you are not blocked out by bad track laying. So you got to figure out a good position to start. And the other thing is the companies have a fixed amount of available tokens. In this game, I think it goes from 1 to 3. So the worst company possibly is the Tosa Kuroshio Railroad that only has a single tokens. And then other companies have usually 2 or 3 tokens. And usually the more tokens you have, the better. And once you figured out which company you want to start, you buy the presidency's share. I already said that. The first share you buy from a company is the presidency. And you are allowed to choose the value of these shares. These are the par values. So you see here, and also here, that's exactly the same basically. You choose a value, 65, 70, 75, 80, 90, or 100. You place the marker of the company on that value, and that indicates then how much every share here in the initial offering will cost for the rest of the game. This will not change. But didn't I mention that the price is actually tracked here, the value, and that it changes during the game? Well, kind of. So what happens is whenever you buy a share from the initial offer, you pay the par value. Whenever you sell a share, you never sell it back into the initial offering. You never sell shares in here. You always sell the shares into the open market. When you trade with the open market, you trade for the value that is indicated here on the stock market. So when you sell shares in here, you get the value shown here, and you also can buy shares from here, and then you pay the value shown here. And when you trade with the initial offering, you always pay the par value. So you set the par value, and then you pay twice the par value for the presidency because it's a double share, it's 20%. Now, you're only allowed at that point to buy a single certificate, because when it's your turn during the stock round, you can only buy one certificate. But the company is not allowed to operate yet. The 20% alone is not enough to make a company operate. You have to buy, or overall, players have to buy 50% from the initial offering to make a company operate. This is called the company floats. And when 50% are purchased, then players, the president, will receive the company's sheet. He will place the company's token in here, and he will get the starting capital in the treasury. And the starting capital of the company is always 10 times the par value. Now keep in mind, even though there are only 5 shares, 50% sold from the initial offering, the company still receives 10 times the par value. So there is this balance here when it comes to setting the par value. On the one side, you want a high par value because it gives the company more money. On the other side, you want to buy many shares, and if you set the par value high, that's probably not going to be possible. So when you start a company and you're thinking where to set the par value, first thing is very important, make sure you're going to be able to float the company. If you got a partner that helps you, that's even better. But you know that sometimes people are not that reliable. You got to make sure that you got enough cash that you can buy 50% of the company. That's very, very important. And the second thing is, I usually would recommend to start the companies at a lower par value at the beginning, because at the start of the game it's not that important that companies have a lot of money. Trains are not that expensive at the beginning, and it's more important that you have a lot of shares, because the more shares you have, the more money you make. And especially at the beginning, making money is super important because you can reinvest that money. So this is a typical snowball effect here. The more money you make, the more you can reinvest, and the more you make in future turns. So if you only have one more share at the start of the game compared to other players, that can already make a difference at the very end of the game. I mean, I'm not saying that you're already lost if you have one less share, but there is definitely a handicap. So at the start of the game, you better par low. Okay, so at that point we basically know everything we have to know about stock rounds. We know how to start a company, we know what the presidency is, how it works, and we know in general how to trade shares during stock rounds. Now what's important here is this is just one specific, the starting of companies in this game follows a specific model that's called full capitalization. There are other games where it works different. Another learning game that many people use is 1846, and there the whole thing works a little different. So if you watch this video, make sure you're playing a game that uses a full capitalization like 1830 or 1889. Otherwise, yeah, the guy who teaches the game should teach you how to start the companies. Okay, so now I guess we can go into the operating rounds. So during an operating round, companies operate in share value order. That means the most valuable company starts, and then, well, it goes to the least. There are tiebreakers. So for example, in this situation, the company with a share value of 80 would go first. Then all these three companies have a share value of 70, and the company of which the marker is the most right marker. So in this case, this one here, the 70 here, this company would be second. If there would be another company with 70 which would be here, then this company would be second and that company would be third. And if some companies share the same space, like these two, then you go from top to bottom. And whenever a company here on this track enters a space where there are already companies, for example, if 2 shares of that company would have been sold, then the market value drops and it goes underneath all the other companies that are already there. So from all these 3 companies, this company would operate last. During an operating round, companies can do different actions, and there are 4 actions, and they will do them in exactly that order. And that is something you simply have to write down, or sometimes it is also written somewhere in the game and on one of these companies' chart, for example. You got to know that, right? It's not a big deal, but you have to simply learn that. So the first thing that company does is lay track. This is optional. Then a company may place a single station marker, also optional again. The company then has to run the trains, and the last thing the company does is it may purchase trains. It has to purchase trains if it does not own trains. Now, you can see here that it's kind of interesting that the purchase train step comes after the run train step. That means in the first operating round, companies will not generate revenue because they don't have trains. Okay, so let's talk first about the first step, the lay track step. So we got all these track tiles here, but at the start of the game, only the yellow track tiles are available. And you can see we have here on the map, we got plain areas, and we got areas with these circles. These are towns. And then we have areas with dots. These here, and these are pretty much all the same. These are ports, which is a little bit special in this game, but in general, all these dots are basically the same. These are towns. So we got the cities, and we got the towns, and we got plain areas. And you have to use the matching track. So we got plain track here, we got the cities with the circles, and then we got the towns, which are just dots. Now, there's a ton of track here, but it starts all very simple. You only have 3 different types of plain track. And you have only the matching cities. So you got also just a straight with a city. You got this narrow curve here with a city, and you got here this gentle curve with a city. And this basically allows you, when you leave a hex, you can go in every direction. You can even go straight ahead. You can go in these hexes here, right? Or you can go in these hexes. So you can basically reach every hex with these basic track tiles. Now it's important to mention that these track tiles are actually limited. So if you need a specific tile and it's no longer here, well, then you can't use it. That's a bad news then. And there is one city here, Kotohira, which has its own track tile. You can see? So that's Kotohira, and here you can only place this specific tile. You cannot place other tiles there. You're not allowed to place in areas that are gray. Here or here. You can also not place in the red areas. And at the start of the game, you can also not place here in this green colored area. If you want to lay track in an area which has specific terrain, like these mountains here, you can see there's a small cost indicated here. You got to pay $80 for that. And this money comes from the treasury of the company. Every cost that has to be paid during the operating round comes from the company. And I already mentioned it, you're not allowed to help, with the one exception that the company has no train. But apart from that, you're not allowed to help. If a company cannot afford to lay track, it can't do it. During an operating round, a company is allowed to lay one single track tile. When a company operates for the first time, it has to start at the tile where its starting location is. So for example, let's say we start here with the orange company. What we would do is we would place one city tile. I don't know which one. Let's take this one here. We simply raise that city tile here. Well, maybe that's not so good. We want to go to other cities too. So like that. And then we would place one of our station markers on top here. Okay, that is our home station, and that station is free. And you can see that here. When you receive the company, you get 2 stations, and the first one shows a 0 and then these Japanese symbols. So the 0, that's the cost you have to place, you have to pay for placing the first token, so it's free. Now when you lay further track in the upcoming operating rounds, you have to make sure that the track that you place is connected to one of your stations. It does not have to necessarily be connected to your home station, but it has to be connected to a station. So for example, I could now, in the next turn, I could lay track here, and then in an upcoming turn I can lay track here after paying 80 bucks, can try to connect down here, for example, and so on. If there would be, for some reason, the token of a different company placed here, that would block my connection. I can not build beyond that token because it is no longer connected. So a little later in the game, additional tiles will be available. First the green tiles and then later the brown tiles. And you can see that it gets more complex. It's not just a simple straight, but now you have an additional curve, for example. So what you can do when these tiles get available, you can upgrade yellow track to green. You cannot simply place the tiles, you have to upgrade them. And you have to upgrade them in a way that new part of the track is connected to your home station. So let's assume this is not here and we want to upgrade this track into this. We can do it like this because there is a connection to the new track, but we couldn't do it like this. And that is actually a little bit special in this game. I mean, other games also have it, but there are games where it says as long as you are connected to the tile in general, you can upgrade in any way you want. In this game, you need a connection to the new track. Now, if you upgrade a city, you can see here, these are the green cities. Some of them only have a single space, but some of them have two spaces. So what I can do here in this situation where this is blocked, I can upgrade this to a city which has a free space. And now this is no longer blocked. At least not until someone else places a token here. Okay. One thing important when upgrading, track that was placed before has to remain intact. So this piece of track will be here for the rest of the game. You cannot simply, I don't know, place something like this here. This doesn't work. That's not working. You can place something like this, but the straight has to stay here. Okay. So the next thing is you can place a station. Now, company is allowed to place one single station per operating round, but the starting station doesn't count because that is basically placed at the very beginning of its operating round and not during this placing station step. So you can place a single station. The price is indicated here. So for 40 yen, for example, this company could place a station if it still has one. So it takes a station and it can place it, but the station has to be connected to one of its other stations. And again, if there should be a blocked city in between, that doesn't count as connection. But in this case, I could, for example, place a station here, or I could also place a station down here. Now you can see here, there is already, that is a starting position of another company. I'm not allowed to place my station on starting positions of other companies. But there's a free space here, so there is a connection. So I could, for example, place a token here. Next, the company runs trains. Now, you can see here, these are the trains, and these larger numbers here indicate how many stations or how many locations a company, this train can connect. So the first train that is available in the game is the 2 train, and it simply connects the starting point and the destination point. So with a 2 train, I could go from here to here. You cannot skip stations, even though if this station would be more valuable, well, actually it wouldn't, but it goes only from, you cannot skip. You can go into these off-board areas, the red ones. They also count as locations, and they are usually fairly valuable. And depending on the track type that is available, they change their value. So as long as there's only yellow available, it's 30. Then comes green, it's still 30. And then when brown becomes available, it's 60, if you go there. So, yeah, if you have a 3 train, you can go, for example, from here to here and then to here. Right? That would be a 3 train. There are restrictions. So first of all, you can only use every piece of track once per operating round. Other companies, of course, can also use it, but every company can only use it once per operating round. That's very important, even if it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of track. Every track can only be used once. A single train can only hit a location once. So, for example, with a 3 train, you cannot go from here, or let's say you have a 4 train. You could not go from here, 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 and then back here, because you would have hit this location twice. That's not possible. So every location can only be hit once by a single train. However, it is possible that a company runs multiple trains, and then it could hit the same location with multiple trains. For example, if the company had a 2 and a 3 train, I could go from here to here, and with the 3 train I could also go from here to here and then again to here. The last thing is every train, every route of a train has to somewhere hit one of your stations. You cannot simply run anywhere on the board. You have to hit a station. That can be in the middle of your route or wherever, or at the start, at the end, it doesn't matter, but it has to be somewhere. So every piece of track only once, every city once per train, and you cannot skip, and you have to make sure that you hit a station. After you did that, comes the ugly part. You have to calculate the revenue. So what you do is you add up all the locations that you have hit with your trains, and yeah, that's then the overall revenue. If you hit a location more than once, you can also count it more than once. So, for example, going from here to here, and then with the other train like this, would means 30, 50, and then the other train is 80, 110, so that would be 130 overall revenue. I hope I didn't make a mistake here. This is the overall money that the company earned during this operating round. And the president has now to decide if he wants to keep that money in the company or if he wants to pay it out to the shareholder. If he keeps the money, he simply takes the 130 bucks from the bank and he puts them in the treasury. The shareholders get nothing, that means he gets nothing, and in addition to that, the company will drop one space to the left. It will lose in value. And I flip this to indicate that this company already operated, and at the end, when all the companies operated, we're going to flip it back. But it's easier to see which company already operated if you flip the tokens after they operated. If you pay out the revenue, you don't get the money. What you do is you divide the overall revenue by 10. So 130 means 13 yen are paid out per 10% share. That means every shareholder gets money depending on how many shares they have. If there are shares here in the open market, then the company will get the money for these shares. Not shares in the initial offering. The money for these shares in the initial offering is lost. It simply stays in the bank. Okay, that's the payout basically. And if you do pay out, by the way, then the value increases and it goes to the right. So for the shareholders, president, everybody's happy when you pay out, but maybe from time to time you have to swallow if you run out of money. That also means if you generate no revenue because you have no train, that's what happens in the first turn. You cannot pay out a dividend, and then the value will also drop to the left. The last step of the operating round is purchasing trains. Well, that's pretty simple. You can see here, that's the value of the trains. And you can only buy, if you buy here from this train offer, you always have to buy the cheapest train. So that kind of represents the technology that increases. At the beginning, you can only buy the bad trains. Then, once all of these trains are purchased, you can start buying the 3 trains. You can already see they are significantly more expensive, right? These are 80, these are already 180. These are already 300, and so on. Yeah, that's pretty much all that happens during the train purchase. You simply purchase trains. You can buy, technically, you can buy more than one train, of course. There is a train limit, and the train limit will change with the phase. So at the start of the game, the train limit, I don't wonder, oh, that's written here, very, very small. At the start of the game, the train limit is 4. So a single company may have a maximum of 4 trains. Later in the game, this number will decrease, and at the end of the game, or toward the end of the game, companies are only allowed to have 2 trains. Now, another important aspect is that basically these train purchases, they drive the game. Whenever the first train of a new type is purchased, there will be some event or the rules change a little bit. So for example, when the first 3 train is purchased, then you are allowed to upgrade yellow tiles to green. You cannot do that here in this so-called yellow phase. That's why the train is yellow, because there are only yellow tiles available. But once the first 3 train is purchased, you can upgrade tiles. And when the first 5 train is purchased, which is brown as you can see, then you are also allowed to use the brown tiles. and you will upgrade green to brown. You cannot upgrade yellow to brown. You always upgrade from yellow to green, and then from green to brown. Very important. Another interesting aspect, when the first 3 train is purchased, you can not only buy trains from here, you are also allowed to purchase trains from other companies if both presidents agree. Usually you will not buy trains from other players' companies. It could happen, but it's kind of unlikely. Most of the time, what you will do is, if you control more than one company, you will simply start purchasing trains from one company into the other, because you can do that for any price you want. Minimum 1. You cannot do it for free. 1 yen is the minimum price, but you can do it for as much as you want. And that allows you to transfer money between your companies, which is an important aspect in this game. Another thing is, when the first 4 train is purchased, all the 2 trains are destroyed. They will simply be removed from the game without any compensation. That's a big deal. This is called train rusting. When the first 6 train is purchased, all the 3 trains are removed. And you can see here, it is actually written here, rusted by 6, rusted by 4. And when the first diesel train, and by the way, this simply means it's an unlimited route. So as long as you're not blocked or anything, there is no limit on how many cities you can hit. So when the first diesel is purchased, even the 4 trains are destroyed. So that means only the 5 trains, the 6 trains and the diesel trains are so-called permanent trains. And this is how players can go bankrupt, and how it is basically possible that a company has no train. Because if the company spent all its money for the cheaper trains, I don't know, they might have bought 2 trains, maybe 2-3 trains, and then, I don't know, did some expenses here, and then eventually the 3 trains are destroyed, then it might be necessary for you to buy a 6th train, or if there's no 6th train available anymore, you might even have to be a diesel. And it's not unlikely that the company simply does not have the money to do that. So one of the goals in this game is basically to somehow get a permanent train in your companies, so that there is no longer the threat of a bankruptcy. So these are the main rules. Now, if you made it to here and you say, okay, this is it, I'm done, I cannot watch this anymore, and you now know the main rules for the game, and you might finish, and then you can start playing if the guy you're playing with explains you how the privates work. There are private companies, that's one additional thing, and this is really a little bit tricky now, but I'm going to try to explain it anyway. So, the game comes with, well, I think it's 7 privates, yeah, and depending on the player number, 1 or 2 of these privates, or none, are removed. So the more players there are, the more privates there are. And if you take a look here, there's this value here, that is what it says here, par value. Usually that means face value. And we have a revenue here, and then each private has some kind of special ability. I really do not want to go in the special abilities here. That's something you can really read then when you play the game. So at the beginning of the game, there will be an auction. That's the first thing you do in this game. You auction the privates, all of them. So the way that works is the privates are arranged from the one with the cheapest value to the one with the highest value. So we have here 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and let's say the others are not in the game because, I don't know, we only play, let's say one more. Okay, let's put this one also in the game. So we play a 3-player game, and then we have these 3 and where we should. Okay, so they are all arranged in that line from the cheapest to the most expensive one. Now we have a waterfall auction. What does that mean? I mean, this is really a little bit weird, but once you get into it, it's kind of interesting. So what you do is, the first player is the guy, well, with the priority deal, and this is determined randomly at the start of the game. And you take a look here, and if there is no money on the cheapest company, you have the option to buy that company here for face value. So the first player has now technically the option to buy this company for 20 bucks. Now, he probably won't do that, and I can tell you later why. You also have the option to place a bid on any of the other companies. And that bid has to be at least 5 bucks higher than face value, or if there already is a bid on one of the other companies, it has to be 5 bucks higher than that bid, than that previous bid. So you have to be the highest bidder if you place a bid on that company, on a company. So, okay, let's say, I don't know, player 1 says, I'm interested in this Dogo Railway because it's a pretty cool company, and he places, I don't know, let's say, let's take some money, let's say he places 75 bucks here, right? Now, he would be only forced to place 65, but let's say he says 75 because he thinks he's not going to get it cheaper anyway. So he places the money here, and then it's player 2. And now he could also buy this one, but he's interested in one of the others. So he says, hey, I want this one, for example, for 45. So he places, or for 40 bucks, so let's say he places 50 bucks here. And then comes the next player and he says, I also find this one interesting. So he places like, I don't know, let's say 80 bucks on that company here. 5 bucks more than the previous player. And so on. So usually what happens is you will have pretty much a stack of money on most of these companies, and I don't know, let's say got another one playing here, and maybe someone placed a bid here, and let's say it looks like that. So now, again, if the leftmost company, if there is no money here, the player can buy it for face value. So let's say now a player says, hey, I'm going to buy this thing for 20 bucks. So he does that. And what happens now is, now on the leftmost company, there is a bid. So that means this player will get the company immediately for the money that he placed there. So he simply takes this company and the money goes into the bank. Now we go to the next company and we see here now there are 2 bids. So now these two players, and only these two, will auction this company between them. So they will just raise their bids until someone wins, and then the loser gets back his money, and the winner has to pay the money into the bank, and he takes this. And now we see again, we have now a company without a bid. So who is now the next player? Well, the next player is the player. Remember, there was one guy who actually purchased the company here for 20 bucks. And all these things then kind of happened out of order. And then the player who would be after this guy, he has now the chance to buy this company either for 50 bucks, or he could again place a bid on one of these companies. Now let's assume he says, hey, 50 bucks, that's a good deal. I'm going to buy that company. Now again, these two players will auction the company, the Dogo, and one of them will get it and the other one will get the money back. So this goes away, and then here the last player, we only have a single bid, so that means he will get this company for the price he placed there. And then the auction ends. And now the next player to act will be the player who comes after the player who bought this 80 buck company. I think it was 80. Which one was? No, it wasn't 80. I think it was the 50 buck company, the one where there was no bid, and then he decided, I'm going to take that. So the player who would come after this guy would now be the one who actually starts the first stock round. He can now pick a presidency if he has enough money left after the auction to do so. So this is all a little bit confusing. I hope I managed to explain how that works. And what is important during these waterfall auctions is you have to place your bids in a way that players don't get the company for cheap, right? So that's the reason why it makes no sense to buy the cheapest company without making sure that there are other players or that the bids. Well, let me put it that way. That if there is one guy who only placed a single bid, you really got to make sure that it is okay for you that he gets this thing just basically for face value or just for 65, and that there is no one that does an auction to increase the price for that, right? So don't start the waterfall until there is a good chance that the companies go for a reasonable high price, because then the guy who gets the companies for cheap, yeah, he's in a very, very strong position. But why are the companies so important? I didn't explain that because that's just an additional layer, and well, in my basic rules I didn't want to explain that. So technically, during an operating round, the first thing that happens is the privates will pay the revenue. So this one, for example, 20 bucks, this one 15 bucks. So every player gets, or let's say it that way, the owner of the privates will get the revenue before the companies operate in descending share value order. Then, as I already mentioned, every company has a specific ability, but I'm not going to go into this. The most important thing is, as soon as the first 3 train has been purchased, the share companies can buy the private companies from the players for up to double the face value. So that means if you have this Sumitomo Railroad, then if you control a public company, you can simply buy it in the public company, take $100 out of the treasury, and take it as your personal money. This is pretty much the only way to get money directly from the treasury into your pocket. Obviously, the more value these have, right? This, for example, gives you $160. Now that will hurt the company significantly if you buy it in for double the value. But it gives you a huge boost. It will allow you to buy, I don't know, 2 or maybe even 3 additional shares if you can sell that company, that private into your company. So that's a very valuable option, and usually you want to make sure that you sell these privates as soon as possible. Don't keep them. Don't care too much about their ability. The most important point of the privates is that you get the money out of them. And then when they are in the company, they will pay the revenue to the company, and most privates actually basically just work when they are owned by a company. For example, like this one, the owning corporation may ignore building costs for mountain hexes which do not also contain rivers, right? So that's definitely an advantage for the company. So again, you can do this as soon as the first 3 train is purchased, and if you can time that in a clever way so that you are the only one who does that right before the stock round happens and nobody else has their money from a private, that can give you a big boost right away at the start of the game. The privates are closed when the first 5 train is purchased. So you got to make sure you buy your privates in before that happens. So now you know pretty much all the rules. I might have forgotten a few little details, but you know, sometimes I did that consciously because I don't want to make it too complex. But this is pretty much all you got to know right now. And there's one kind of a tactical advice I want to give you. Because, you know, if you're a real beginner, maybe you don't know this maneuver, but it's important to know that because otherwise you might lose pretty easy. And this is the dumping of a company. So let's say there's a player who's got a couple of bucks in this company, or maybe just not much, just, I don't know, kind of like $25 in here, and he's got like, I don't know, let's say he's got 2 trains in here, for example. And the player started a new company, and you know, let's say he received, I don't know, kind of like $800 or something. He started it at 80, and so he gets $800 here in the treasury. Now let's assume you think, hey, that sounds like a really good, like a good investment. I'm going to buy shares of that company too. It has $800. So let's assume you buy 2 shares of that company. Let's say this guy has kind of like 50%. That's what he needs to float. And you have 2 shares of that company. Now what he could do is he could say, you know, I don't really need that company. I only need the money of the company. So what he could do is he could buy a 2 train, which is usually worth 80 bucks, into this company for 800 bucks. And then in the next stock round, he simply sells the 5 shares, and you have 2 shares, which means you are now the new president of the company. You have 0 money in here and only a 2 train. And as soon as the first 4 train is purchased, the 2 train will be gone and you're fucked. You have to make sure the company gets a train and you're in a ton of trouble. And this is what is called dumping a company. So basically, you use the advantage that you have control over a company, completely exploit that company, and then sell all the shares, and someone else gets then the trouble. And the same thing is possible if you have a high value private company, for example. If I have an 80 private company and I kind of sell that for 160 bucks, that company is really weakened. And if I can get rid of it, it might be a good position. So these are things, if you invest in other players' companies, you got to be aware that this could happen. Now, I'm not saying you should not invest. If the player has little options to exploit the company, then investing might be a real good idea. What you always can do is you can buy a single share in the company, because to become a president, you need 20%. The other option would be, for example, if you realize that you will act before him in the upcoming stock round, then you can react first. And if you see, oh man, he really fucked up this company, then you can quickly sell your shares before he gets the opportunity to do so. So this is it. I know it's been a long video. I explained a lot of the rules. It's nearly complete, I guess. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it. Hope it helps a little bit to get into this genre. I can tell you, in my opinion, these are the best games out there. They are absolutely glorious and fascinating, and it might be a little bit intimidating at first. Maybe your first games will be really learning experiences, but you know, if you enjoy clever strategic games, highly interactive games, it doesn't get better than that. Okay, so hope to see you in one of my next videos. Bye.